I'm often asked a question about sailing. Am I too old to go sailing? I think it's a very good question. I sail a lot, so I think about it a lot, and I also look at people who I often consider are a little bit too old to go sailing, or maybe they're sailing already and they're probably a bit too old. So it's a good question to ask, and it's a question I do get. Do I have enough experience? I don't know if I'm capable of doing offshore sailing. I'm a bit scared of the open ocean. I think these are all good questions. I think they're rational questions to ask yourself, and for other people to ask of you. I often get a multitude of questions when people come and join me as crew. What experience do you have? Where have you been? How safe is the boat? What happens in an emergency? And I typically do a shakedown cruise, and that gives people a lot of confidence because they get to sail on the boat and they get to experience what the boat is like. And my boat is a 50-year-old alloy ketch built in Holland out of 6 to 8 millimetre aluminium. It is built like a tank, but boats of any flavour can still sink. So I don't take being built out of aluminium lightly. I just take it that it is stronger than the average boat, but still needs to be careful. But getting back to the point I was trying to make about sailing, whether you're too old to go sailing, have enough experience to go sailing, what it takes. I think it takes a desire and a will to go sailing. And last year I had a chap come on board, and he wanted to go offshore sailing. He bought himself a yacht, which is often the case. People buy a boat without really thinking about sailing and even knowing whether they have the skills to go sailing. But he'd done a bit of sailing, and he bought a boat, and he was getting that boat prepared to go offshore sailing. And I think that is the wrong order of things. I think the smart thing to do if you want to go sailing around the world is to go and get on boats as a crew member. Even if you had to pay, I have people coming on my boat all the time, and I quite like having older people. In many cases, there's a lot less bullshit. Younger people, they're a bit, I want to be here, I want to be there, I'm not quite sure about this or that. They want to do everything. It's the old trying to fit everything into one little week or month. Whereas older people, you know what you want, you know where you've been, you know what you're capable of doing most of the time. And if they say they're going to do something, they generally do it. And that's something I like about older people. They've got the resources to fly somewhere and meet you. And if they say they're going to be there on that date, they'll be there on that date. Or they'll give you a call and tell you that they can't be there for whatever reason. They won't typically dick you around. Whereas younger people will promise you the world, and then often, sadly, they'll ring up and say, hey, I found a better boat. I've become accustomed to that now with taking crew on. And sadly, there's a number of people who don't think anything of wasting people's time. So having older crew members is often a blessing. And the other thing having older crew members gives you is loads of experience. People have experience in everything. It's one thing I learnt when I was in the military. I worked in Special Forces. I was privileged to do so. I was privileged to work with some amazing people. But it's not always the people you're working with that make any mission or any job successful. It's the people that are underpinning it, the logistics guys, the air crews, the cook. People fight on their stomach, people sail on their stomach. And that's the thing I learnt a long time ago when I was in the military, is to harness the skills of everybody in your collective to achieve a better outcome. And I've been blessed to meet some amazing people, and people I still have as close friends today, who weren't kicking indoors and taking names. They were guys who were doing the logistics. They were the cooks. They were the guys who were arranging things, who were just really bloody good at their job and humble about it. They just wanted to see things get done well the first time, every time. You could count on them, and often they don't get the thanks that they deserve. But the thing I took away from that is these are the people you want in your life. These are the people who bring a significant joy to your world, and they make things easier in any field that you're in, and it's also relevant to sailing. So if you're one of those people, you know, there is a skipper out there looking for you to be on his boat. I remember I had a friend, Mark. Now Mark wanted to learn to sail. Mark's got amazing skill set. You know, he runs a couple of different businesses. He's a builder, a plumber. He runs a oil and gas business, built his own homes. You know, and he wanted to go and sail around the world. Now, awesome. Mark didn't have any sailing experience, so he just wanted to go sailing. So, you know, we got chatting on the phone, and I remember he flew in. He just went and bought a whole heap of wet weather gear, you know, a couple of $1,000 worth. Had all the gear he needed. Turned up on the boat, or in Rose Bay. That's where the boat was at the time. And I rowed ashore. I picked him up, went back to the boat, gave him a bit of a heads up. I had another crew member on, a lady, and we sat down. We talked about it. You know, what was going on. We were going to sail down to Victoria, to Melbourne, and you know, we had to go through Bass Strait. Now, Bass Strait has a reputation of being a nasty piece of water, and it can really hand you your ass at times. So my female crew member had done a lot of sailing, a lot of racing, and had a lot more experience. Mark had almost no experience on the water. So we just talked about what we're going to do, and we just broke it down into stages. You know, first day we're going to sail out of Sydney Harbour, which is always bloody amazing. Next day we're going to sail down the coast, and you know, we're going to sail down into to Jervis Bay, and then we're going to get down to Bateman's Bay and Eden and round the point and Gabo Island and head down into Bass Strait. So I didn't really know what to make of Mark, but I knew he had a variety of experience, and he didn't really articulate that well, but you could tell he was pretty handy with things. And straight away put his hand to fixing things that need to be done. We need to, you know, do a bit of a Bunnings trip, which is a fair walk from the harbour in Rose Bay, and you know, we got a couple of things come back, fixing things. So I just sailed from Hervey Bay in Queensland, so I was always fixing things on the go. Anybody who's got a boat, you are constantly fixing shit. So we got that done. We did a bit of groceries. We went out to the pub, had a meal. We might have gone to the RSL actually. And then early the next morning we got ready to leave. And you know, it was a cracker of a day. You know, what Mark didn't anticipate was he got seasick. But you know, he was a stoic guy and never complained once. You know, it's just part of life on a boat. You know, most people get seasick on the first day or two if they haven't never been on a boat before. But I anticipate they're going to get seasick. You know, whereas I try to tell people that it's not always the case. Not everybody gets seasick, and that's my belief. But a lot of people expect to get seasick. Their friends tell them they're going to get seasick, so you know, often they're expecting that. But you know, Mark's skills really shined. You know, like when I was trying to fix things, and you know, like we had awesome conversations about stuff. You know, I have an interest in building. One day I want to build my own house. So you know, he'd build his own house, and thought about, you know, contextualising modular homes and building it in the shed and then carting it out to site and building it quickly, as opposed to what most builders do is to like take forever to build a house, and you know, it's just costing you money. So we had some great conversations talking about his businesses and how he got his skills, and you know, but what we established is Mark's seasickness didn't go away. You know, he still suffered with seasickness, but it didn't stop him. You know, I remember we were going through Bass Strait, and it was as rough as guts, and we ended up sailing down into Refuge Cove, and on the way, the gooseneck which attached to the mast snapped. metal fatigue, and it snapped off. And that was a real pain because I ended up having to tie the gooseneck onto the mast using rope. Still managed to sail along. We reefed it down and just sailing with one reef in, and two reefs in, and we got to Refuge Cove. And when we got there, that's where Mark's skills really shone, because we were trying to work out how to fix the gooseneck. The mount completely broken, and then we have a look around and we find that on the other side of the mast, the bottom of the spinnaker pole slide, that was the same fitting. So we ended up chopping one off one side, doing some improvements, and then modifying other things and pop riveting and gluing it onto the mast on the gooseneck side. So there was a few hours of work and cutting and grinding, and Mark came up with some really clever ideas on how to fix that. And so he's an absolute treasure on a boat. Like, great guy, good conversation, and then the girl on board. We were planning to get to Melbourne, but the weather had closed in, so we weren't going to get to Melbourne in the next couple of days. So we ended up having to sail down into Port Welshpool, which was again an absolute shocker of a day. Like, we were motoring against it, finally got into the river. We're surfing in through the river, because it's a bit of a bar, but quite mild. But getting to Port Welshpool, tying up to these shitty old wharves, and we ended up getting stuck on that wharf for about 4 days in 50 knots, trying to fend the boat off in massive winds. So Mark and I had loads of time, and we just continued sailing after that to Portland. That's where I was taking the boat on that particular trip, and Mark lives in South Australia, so it was close for him to go back home. And again, like, he was feeling unwell, but he just wanted to keep going. He wanted to see whether he was suitable to sail around the world, to buy his own boat. He could afford a boat. He just didn't know what type. So we talked a lot about boats, and we sort of determined with Mark, being prone to seasickness, that something like a catamaran or a trimaran up in Asia, where it's potentially calmer, or you can wait for calmer seas, might be suitable. Less heeling, or a heavy motor sailor, like a pilot house, old style, probably 30-40 tons, big old engine, and it would heel a lot less. It would bounce around a lot less. Tintin's it's a 44-foot boat, but it's 12 ton. It's quite light, and it's quite responsive for an older boat. So it does heel over quite a lot, and it's gets a bit of motion from the ocean. So we talked a lot about what potentially was a better fit for Mark. Like a fast monohull was not going to be a good boat. Like, if you're seasick and you're throwing up and you're just completely exhausted, trying to operate a fast mono is not going to be good. And it wouldn't be much better on a cat or a try, because it'd still be bouncing around and he'd probably still be getting seasick. But if you pick the area where you want to go sailing, like you go up into Malaysia or Thailand and buy a boat, that might have been the perfect spot for him, and still could have achieved his dream. But he wanted to sail around Australia, so my thoughts were, go and find a heavy boat and then take one of those for a sail and see how you go. It might be a lot more comfortable in heavy seas and less prone to making you seasick. So Mark went off and did his next adventure, which was on a catamaran from Adelaide across to Albany in West Australia, across the Great Australian Bight. Again, another piece of very nasty water, or potentially can be, but every 5 days you get your ass kicked out there. And again, he got whacked with really bad seasickness. This time he was incapacitated, because cats on big oceans, they tend to get flogged around a bit. Even I don't like the motion of a cat on a big ocean. I find them less desirable than a monohull. So that sort of determined that he wasn't really cut out for big seas. But I don't think that should stop him from having the dream of going sailing. You just have to be smart enough to know where to go sailing. So, picking your sailing area might be another choice. He could have a boat up in Asia and he could sail around all parts of Asia and potentially, just get the right weather. A lot of motor sailing or big hairy sails, and even a fast trimaran might have been suitable up in those parts of the world for him. So, they're just different thoughts on what it takes, but I do believe it's smart for anybody who's thinking about going sailing to go and do, crew. Go and crew on people's boats. Generally, people are looking for crew. You normally throw in 20 or 30 bucks for food. That's what I typically charge people, and because I'm paying for people to be on the boat, they generally want an experience. If I want a crew member, I won't be charging them, but people generally want the experience, so I get them to cover the cost of food. That's how I work it on my boat, because its benefit is I have crew on board, they help with the watches, and they get the joy of the sailing experience. In some cases, you might need to pay, but generally, if people are looking for crew, they're happy to have you cover cost of food, or to have you on the boat for free. It depends on the situation. Everybody has a different situation, and typically, you should expect to do a leg. That's how I do it. I have an arrangement where, if we're leaving from New Zealand, you sign on in New Zealand, and you sign off in, say, Nadi in Fiji. That way we all know where we're going. It's a 10-day journey approximately, and at the end of that journey, you should be prepared to leave the boat and find your own way on the next leg. If we get along famously and I invite you for the next leg up through the Assawas or up to Sava or somewhere, then great. But not everybody makes great crew, and not everybody gets along. So I think as a crew member, you need to have the funds to be able to jump on and jump off a boat. Because sometimes you won't like the captain, sometimes the captain won't like you, sometimes you just won't like the environment or the boat. And it's certainly something you need to think about, is what makes a safe boat. And I might go through that in another podcast. But if you're looking at sailing, I would strongly advise you to look at the crewing sites and just be honest. Say, I want to buy a boat, I'm looking for sailing experience, and you want to do passage making. You want to go from one place to another place. Start off with coastal cruising, like a 2-day sail. 24-hour sail doesn't really give you a feel of what sailing's about. You want to do 2 or 3 days, a couple of overnight sails, gives you an idea of what sailing is. Sailing for 12 hours is like getting in your car and driving for a few hours. It's easy. Sailing for 2 or 3 days, it's tiring. You're working on crew changes, you've got to eat. These are when you actually see what's important on a boat also. Having a stove that can gimbal, having a fridge and freezer that work, having a toilet that can function in a big sea that isn't going to draw water in on a port tack or a starboard tack. Hatches that stay dry or don't leak. Beds that have lead cloths so you don't fall out of the bunk. All of these things come into play on a long extended passage. And you also don't want to be sailing in perfect weather all the time. You want to be sailing in really shit weather. One of my last crew members, a girl called Claire, she wanted to learn how to sail a boat in heavy weather. Her and her husband have a boat, so she signed on to sail to Tonga with me. Had all-girl crew, which was unusual, but it's good fun. And Claire was awesome. She really wanted to learn to sail, and she wanted it to be in shit conditions, which is unusual. But sailing to Tonga, you're going to get shit conditions. At some point, it's likely that you're going to get some bad weather, and we did. 2 days out of Whangarei, we got caught in a 35, 40 knot gale, and we got quite big seas, and it was rough. And then we had the autopilot start to fail. A grub screw broke in the shaft, and so the autopilot was failing. Well, the main autopilot, I had about 3 of these things. And then the engine seized. So a brand new engine, only a month old, took in water because of a installation fault. So she got the full deal. She got, no autopilot, steering in massive seas at night, trying to fix the autopilot. The engine died, having to turn around and come back to New Zealand. But, for someone, I thought, the girls might find this really daunting. They all really thrived on it. They might not have been happy about having to turn back to, go to New Zealand, but Claire was ecstatic. She got to sail in massive seas, in shit conditions, in storms, and everything going wrong. We ended up having to sail back to New Zealand, tack our way up into the harbour, and then sail into the river entrance up to Marsden Cove, and finally turn the engine on for that last couple of minutes to get into the customs dock and turn it back off again before we seized it. So, that was awesome, to have people who just thrived on that experience. And for her, that gave her the confidence to go offshore. She knew she had the skills and the stomach for it. And I think that's important. They're the things I think help to make you confident about sailing offshore. Buying a boat's a piece of piss. Buying the right boat is actually a bit of a challenge. And I can't tell you what the right boat is for you. That's up to you. But I can certainly tell you what makes a good boat. But what I can tell you is sailing offshore on a variety of boats before you purchase a boat is a really smart thing to do, because you get to see that having a gimbaling stove and cooker is important. In shit conditions, when you're heeled over 30 degrees and you're trying to make a brew, but you're heeled over 30 degrees for 4 or 5 days, that's when it becomes important that your stove can gimbal, that you can cook, or make hot water, that you can make a stew, you can make a meal. In our case with the girls, we were baking bread and all sorts of stuff. Claire was a cook, amazing cook too. And, so we were having a great time, living like kings. But normally, if it's a really shit conditions, I'm making cups of tea, or I'm putting a stew on the stove. And that's how I live. So they're just my thoughts on, going sailing. And I do believe getting onto other people's boats where possible, and sailing on a couple of different boats, like sail on a catamaran, sail on a trimaran, sail on a monohull, sail on a couple of different monohulls, sail on a heavy monohull, sail on a light monohull, to work out what you want. I like a fast monohull. My boat is not super fast. It does, averages 6 to 7 knots. But that's not bad for my boat. If you get an old, spray or heavy displacement boat, it might be 4 or 5 knots. And that's a bit too slow. I'd like my boat to be able to do 15 knots, but it'll only do that in a massive storm downwind. And then it gets a bit scary. So I don't want to be sailing a fast, light race boat, or something like a canoe sterned new production boat in big seas. Those things are really sketchy. I want a boat that is seaworthy, and my boat was designed for big seas. It was designed to sail in the North Sea. So it's built for big, heavy seas, and being ketch rigged, I can make it safe and comfortable in any condition. I can hove to in 80 to 90 knots. I know, because I've done it. And I've hove to in 15 to 20 metre seas, because I've done it. And, with the girls on board, we were trying to fix the autopilot. We were hove to in 8 metre seas and 50 knot gale, and it's not comfortable. The waves are breaking over the boat, and it's pissing down rain and all those other things, but that's what you need to be able to do. If you're in a really light production boat, it might not allow you to hove to very well. So getting out on a few different boats is important to work out what is the right boat for you and whether you are cut out for sailing. Anyway, that's my thoughts. I'll leave you with it. Chat again soon.